You cannot negotiate peace with someone who has come to kill you. Golda Meir. On April 25, 1918, Kars was surrendered to the Turks without any resistance. 20 days later, on May 15th, Alexandropol suffered the same fate. No matter how difficult it is to recall those disgraceful pages of our national history, nevertheless, I decided to refresh our memory. For moral healing is better achieved by hurting with the bitter truth than by killing the will to live in the slumber of sweet lies. This story is made up of authentic facts and nothing but facts. Facts are our greatest teachers, and unlike people, they never lie. The price for fake peace. (1918) Armenia. After the collapse of Tsarist Russia in World War I, the Caucasian front was left completely devastated due to the retreat of the Russian army. Despite the exhaustion of the Turkish army, it still decided to take immediate advantage of this opportunity and occupy the Armenian territories. It is noteworthy that there were well-organized and armed Armenian military units against the Turks. After the October Revolution of 1917, the Russian army left on the Armenian front more than 3,000 cannons, 3,000 machine guns, 1 billion bullets, 100,000 military uniforms, 100,000 units of food and supplies, 15 to 17,000 horses, 100,000 rifles, a huge number of chariots, vehicles, and more. Simon Varatsian, the fourth Prime Minister of the First Republic of Armenia. The spirit and the moral strength of the army were high. The Armenian army was prepared to resist, and the command was convinced that Kars would put up a stubborn resistance, enduring for at least 2 weeks to a month. To avoid unnecessary casualties, the Turks would have to make concessions to the Trans-Caucasian government in order to capture the fortress without a fight. The Turks made no concessions and insisted on the immediate surrender of Kars. The Armenian army was not even given time to retreat to Alexandropol with the civilians and their property. The ancient fortress city was faced with a fatal choice, the city renowned for its glorious history. There is a nice assumption that the name Kars originates from the Armenian word hars, which means bride. As the legend goes, the bride of the Armenian king was enchanted by this place during a walk, and she often visited it. From the late 9th century, Kars was referred to as a fortress city. Okay, thank you. In the May 5th, 1918 issue of the Tiflis newspaper Mashak, the article by Saribek Der Melkisedekyan says, on the afternoon of April 11th at 3 p.m., light artillery fire commenced from both sides and lasted only half an hour. Then, on the basis of the telegram received from Tiflis, representatives went to the Turkish army with the white flag and promised to surrender Kars. As soon as the news spread through the city, the soldiers began to shout, "Run, the Turk is coming!" A terrible panic began, full of screams, cries, and mourning. The city was deserted, leaving behind a multitude of stray cows, sheep, dogs, and cats in the streets, whose howling and meowing caused a sense of dreadful excitement and despair. People spilled into the railway station. This is how Saribek Der Melkisedekyan recalls the tragic days of Kars in the pages of the newspaper Mashak. They almost killed each other to find a spot. The train moved, the fortunate ones were lying on top of each other and hanging from the wagons. It was raining and terribly cold. The situation of those perched on the roofs of the wagons was simply unbearable, to say the least. Many of them left their packed belongings at the station and fled on foot. On the road, the carts had flipped over in the mud, children were crying in the rain, some had lost a child, others a mother or wife. This much is enough for now to grasp the situation. So far, we had only read about the torturous flight of the refugees in the newspapers, but now we have witnessed this horrific scene with our own eyes. At the moment of leaving Kars, General Nazarbekyan received the following telegram from Tiflis. I hereby inform you that the province of Kars must be cleared of our troops up to the border running along the Ahuryan River. The fortifications of Alexandropol on the right bank of the Ahuryan River must be demolished. The Trans-Caucasian government has appealed to Turkey to give us 1 month to hand over all the property of the Kars fortress and 1 week to withdraw our troops from the Kars province. Signed by the Prime Minister of Transcaucasia, Chkhenkeli, Acting Minister of War, Odishelidze. Bastards. Vratian writes, This was the situation when Shchenkeli's telegrams began to arrive one after another, which had a profoundly demoralizing impact on the soldiers standing at their posts. Why fight if a ceasefire had been declared? This natural thought spread everywhere like lightning, and the ranks of the troops quickly thinned out. The commander of the Armenian Corps, General Vyshinsky, on the instructions of General Nazarbekyan, in his message to the General Staff on April 11, described the situation as follows. It is probable that Kars would withstand for more than 2 weeks, perhaps even for a whole month, if the proposal to accept the Turkish terms had been rejected in time this morning. The situation could still have been saved, and Kars would undoubtedly have driven the Turks back. Even today, the fortress remained well defended until the moment the orders of Prime Minister Shchenkeli and General Odishelidze were received. As a result, Shchenkeli's directive shattered the momentum of the Armenian army's resistance and caused a terrible disaster.
Очень страшная и прекрасная, как люблю я вас, как боюсь я вас, знать увидел вас, я не буду причем. Очень черная, очень путная, очень страшная и прекрасная.
At 8 a.m., our commander was called to the telephone, and the general command informed him. I'm listening.
The order was given to surrender the fortress and the city to the Turks by 12 a.m. and to retreat to Alexandropol.
The news spread like lightning throughout the fortress. The pen is powerless to convey what we felt upon receiving this news. A dreadful panic ensued before this terrible news spread. All the batteries were filled with extraordinary enthusiasm and warlike spirit, and the commanders were hopeful that they would be able to bury the enemy's army under the walls of Kars. Once the news spread, everything came to a standstill, and occasionally the sound of random gunfire could be heard. Hovaki Melikyan, By the Path of Blood, Hiding, issue number 6, 1925, Boston. Even though all the terms of the Turks had been accepted, the Turkish army didn't cease its operations, forcing our troops to fight on the retreat route to Alexandropol. On April 15th, the Armenian army completely crossed over to the left bank of the Akhuryan River, having previously blown up the fortifications on the right bank. The Turks categorically refused to hand over anything from the property of Kars. They released the soldiers, which is something to be thankful for. In the 19th century, there were 18 churches in Kars. Both male and female schools operated in the city. Saribekter Melkisedekyan wrote in the newspaper Muşak, in 1877, Kars was a city merely in name. In reality and appearance, it resembled nothing more than a complete village. Today, after 40 years of uninterrupted construction work and dedicated efforts to improve the city, handing over Kars to the Turks in a completely improved condition. Spacious streets paved with clean slabs, magnificent schools, splendid churches with towering domes, numerous three-story buildings designed in the European style, various exquisite structures. Thus, after receiving barns and granaries, we gave them palaces. After receiving a pile of dung and a heap of garbage, we gave them gardens and orchards. We took a ruined village and gave them a flourishing, ornate city. We took an old Turkish woman with broken teeth and tattered clothes, and today we are giving Vehip Pasha a luxurious, adorned blonde young lady in her place. We took an old Turkish woman with broken teeth and tattered clothes, and today we are giving Vehip Pasha a luxurious, adorned blonde young lady in her place. After the surrender of Kars to the Turks without any resistance, in defiance of the laws of reason, the Turks only made statements about establishing peace, while in reality they only ensured further advancement under this pretext. In certain Armenian circles, there was a growing enthusiasm regarding the peace agenda with the Turks. Some were enthusiastic that after the surrender of Kars, peace with Turkey would soon be established and the war would end, but that was not all. The next victim of the fake peace was to be Alexandropol.
Կարսի համար տեղեկություններ կուզեն արխիվից հանձնեմ հաղթկապ տվեցինք քանի օր ես կարս եղել եմ կարող է այս տեղեկություն տամ արխիվային բաները պետք հա այդ հանձնելու պահապան ստորագրած բայց բաներ
On page 3 of issue number 83 of the newspaper Muşak, dated May 5th, 1918, in the article entitled In Alexandropol, we read, in Tiflis, various shadowy figures are spreading provocative rumors about the capture of Alexandropol by the Turks. According to the visitors, the situation in Alexandropol is calm at present, thanks to the drastic measures undertaken by the military commander Der Hakopian. The temporary fear among the population was mainly fueled by the influx of refugees, which started with great force from the province of Kars, passed through Alexandropol, and was partly directed to Garakilisa and Tiflis. The Turks have occupied the right bank of the Arpachay River, where our troops had blown up all the forts in accordance with the terms of the ceasefire. The left bank of the Arpachay River was occupied by the Armenian units returning from Kars, and recently arrived reinforcements sent from Alexandropol. The newspaper Kavkazskoye Slovo reports that on April 13th, an Armenian delegation under the leadership of General Aresyan was sent from the Armenian headquarters in Alexandropol to the Turkish headquarters, where he was cordially received. The people of Alexandropol are looking forward to the signing of the peace treaty. In this article, published on page 2 of issue number 87 of the newspaper Muşak of 1918, entitled The Situation in the Alexandropol Province, it says, according to the reports of the people arriving from Alexandropol, our relations with the Turkish authorities near our new border, not far from the Arpachay River, are taking on a calm and stable nature. After the arrival of the Turks, the mixed reconciliation delegation moved continuously from one bank of the Arpachay River to the other, clarifying and resolving the disputed issues. By the way, the head of this delegation, Merkurov, received the official documents from the commander of the Turkish division guaranteeing the safety of the garrison troops in Alexandropol and the civilian population from any incursion by Turkish troops. After the expulsion of the Armenians from the province of Kars, the Turkish army settled on the right bank of the Ahuryan River, a few kilometers from Alexandropol. From here, Gyumri is visible as if on the palm of your hand. But to conquer it, the Turks had to overcome an almost insurmountable obstacle, the fortress of Alexandropol. The Alexandropol fortress was built in the late 1830s on a high hill on the left bank of the Akhurian River, which then marked the Russian-Turkish border. The main purpose of the fortress was to protect Gyumri from a possible Turkish invasion. It was one of the best protected and most inaccessible fortresses in the region, built with the highest military engineering skills of the time. Did the people of Alexandropol have a sense of danger in 1918? Did the military leadership recognize and anticipate the potential threat of a Turkish invasion, and did they take appropriate measures to counter it? Only primary authentic sources can provide the answers to these questions.
Այս բոլոր հարցերի պատասխանները կարող են տալ միայն ու միայն վավերագիր սկզբնաղբյուրները։
From the memoirs of Archbishop Artak Symbatyans, the religious leader of Alexandropol. Encountering negligible resistance, the Turks took cars and moved toward Alexandropol, reaching the vicinity of the Akhurian River on April 10th. At first, the people of Alexandropol were on the brink of panic, but when they saw that only the Turkish vanguard had come and had positioned itself with a small number of troops along the line of the Akhurian River, they calmed down, and daily life continued. Although the Turks were so close, the Armenian military became more and more undisciplined. No one was in their places, neither the soldier nor the officer. All the while, they wandered idly and aimlessly through the streets of the city. Under the guise of trade, the Turks came to the city confidently and unhindered. They would observe everything, the city, its surroundings, probably check the position of the troops, gather information about the actions of the Armenian authorities or their state of alert, and return freely to report to their superiors in cars. In comparison, the Armenians had no permission to cross the Akhurian Bridge, and those who attempted to do so never returned. Turkish border guards would cross the river and rape women working in the fields near the border in broad daylight, then return. And all this went unpunished, as if nothing ever happened. According to Archbishop Artak Symbatyans, everyone in the city was so careless at the time that words can't describe it. Rumors even spread through the city that the Turks had received orders to retreat to Sarıkamış. No one knew where the rumor had come from or from what this source was, the Archbishop said, adding, there was an extraordinary sense of joy in the city as a result, with everyone's face shining. The talk of the town was the news of the retreat of the Turks. It was assumed that some European government, serving as a protector of the Armenian government's rights, had exerted pressure on the Turks, and thus the moment of freedom and joy for the Armenians had finally come, and everyone was happy, especially the soldiers, for whom the concepts of fortresses and barracks were alien, having long since forgotten such places. The ominous rumors circulating among the people seemed to have come true. On May 1st and throughout the night, an incomprehensible atmosphere hung over Alexandropol. It was dawning. The people who had slept under the euphoria of the previous day began to wake up, and the city began to bustle. The sun had just released its rays, illuminating the plain of Shirak and the city itself. The citizens gradually came to life, and life seemed to return to its normal course. Just as today's Yerevan is hard to imagine without dark tinted windows and heavy, fast-moving luxury cars, likewise, it's hard to imagine old Gyumri without its grand and noble fightons. I wonder, do they have any idea that 107 years ago, here in this very city, the expectations of Armenians living with false hopes of peace with the Turks were doomed to vanish. Archbishop Artak Sambatyans writes, "On the morning of May 14, 1918, there were no Turkish troops on the border along the Akhuryan River. They had been withdrawn to Kars during the night. Even the Turkish military tents on the border had been torn down and removed." On May 13th, the withdrawal of the Turkish troops was greeted with extraordinary joy throughout the day. But who took the trouble to investigate or find out why the Turks had left the border and how far they had retreated? This should have been done by the leaders of the Armenian government in Yerevan, who should have approached the problem with wisdom and careful consideration. But most likely, when they also heard about the retreat of the Turkish troops, they were overwhelmed with joy, considering that Yerevan possessed such a formidable force that the Turks were struck with fear, prompting them to retreat, perhaps all the way back to Sarıkamış, or even Erzurum. The Turks had no intention of stopping on the right bank of the Akhuryan River and signing a peace treaty with the Armenians. By feeding the Armenians with hopes of peace, they forced them to concede territories, and with each concession, they prepared themselves for the next advance, naturally breaking all the agreements previously reached. Simon Vratsian wrote about the situation that arose before the handover of Alexandropol to the Turks. The Batumi Peace Project consisted of 12 articles and 3 annexes and imposed extremely strict conditions on the entire Caucasus, especially on Georgia, but most of all on Armenia. The province of Al-Khaltsikhe and the Batumi region, including the port, were to be taken from Georgia and Alexandropol. Al-Khalkalaki, most of the Shirak and Echmiadzin provinces, Surmalu, as well as the Alexandropol Kars and Alexandropol-Julfa railways were to be taken from Armenia. In fact, there was nothing left of Armenia. The Armenians were left with just 11,000 square verst of mountainous territory between Mount Aragats and Lake Seva. In addition to the territorial conditions, they faced extremely difficult economic, commercial, military, and other requirements. Simon Vratsian recalls, "Thus Turkey entered the Caucasus on a large scale, bringing under its influence all the territories south of the Caucasus mountain range. Through Kars, Surmalu, Nakhichevan, Zangezur, and Qarabakh, Turkey connected with Persian and Russian Azerbaijan, and from Baku, vast prospects unfolded towards the Trans-Caspian Turkic, Turanian tribes, and the Islamic world of Central Asia. Enver's pan-Islamic visions were becoming a reality."
Excuse me, we're from Germany. Tell me please, how to get to the Black Castle?
You must go straight up this street, cross the square, turn left, and then you will see the Black Castle.
Okay, thank you very much.
How could this German tourist possibly know that in 1918, the Turkish demands provoked astonishment and outrage not only among the Georgians and Armenians, but also among the Germans? On May 12th, General von Lossow sent a telegram to his government. The outrageous Turkish demands for the separation of purely Armenian provinces, such as Akhalkalaki, Alexandropol, and the parts of the province of Yerevan, which exceeds all limits and boundaries, constitute a flagrant violation of the Brest-Litovsk Treaty and are aimed at the annihilation of the Armenians in the Caucasus. Tonight, the Turks gave an ultimatum that their troops should be allowed to pass through Alexandropol to Julfa without informing me. I protested against such course of actions. The Turks insisted on getting the Alexandropol-Julfa railway so that they can send troops against the British as soon as possible. The representatives of Transcaucasia, Generals Odishelidze and Gorkhanyan, objected, claiming that the issue could not only be resolved by signing a general treaty. This is how Simon Varatsian describes the fall of Alexandropol in his memoirs. Frustrated by their inability to secure the railway through peaceful means, the Turks issued an ultimatum on the night of May 14th to May 15th, demanding the surrender of Alexandropol by 7 a.m. on May 15th and the withdrawal of the Armenian troops 25 kilometers to the east. After receiving no response, at 2 a.m. on May 15th, the commander of the Turkish forces operating against Alexandropol sent a copy of the ultimatum to the commander of Alexandropol, demanding the evacuation of the city by 6 a.m. It was barely possible to translate the paper by 6:30 a.m. At 6 a.m., the shelling of the city and the Turkish offensive began. Caught by surprise, the Armenian army retreated. Alexandropol fell to the Turks. In his memoirs, Archbishop Artak Symbatyans describes the first hours of the Turkish attack. It was 7 a.m. Suddenly, a single cannon shot shook the entire city. In less than a minute, the second, third, and fourth followed in rapid succession. In an instant, a rumor spread among the people that the Turks had not only crossed the Akhurian River, but that their soldiers were already at the door of Sevghul. Nobody could explain how the Turkish army had passed under the fortress unnoticed. Only the military unit in the fortress, caught by surprise, started firing the cannons when they saw the Turks under the fortress and realized they were being attacked. After the first cannon blast, the people were stunned, but when the second and third followed, the rumor spread that the Turks were entering the city. Who could say what was happening there? All the people were in the streets, their shouts, cries, and lamentations could be heard everywhere. Everyone was running towards the station, towards Jajur. Everyone was hurrying to the station, each in their own way, some by carriage, some by van, others by cart or on foot or holding children's hands, running aimlessly back and forth, all in a hell of a mess. Soldiers were also rushing to the station with rifles slung over their shoulders, bandoliers strapped on, holding the hands of their wives or children, or heading to Pambak through the highway and the Jajur mountains. Many parents even abandoned or lost their children in the widespread chaos. Within almost an hour, the city was emptied. On the eve of the ultimatum, Alexandropol was almost impregnable. It is enough to note that the official number of the garrison alone numbered 506 officers and 5,576 soldiers, along with 100 machine guns and 134 cannons. Besides the 1st Armenian Division, the Armenian Combined Forces and Andronix forces were stationed in the city and surrounding villages, totaling about 16,000 soldiers and 1,100 officers. General Tadevos Nazarbekyan, Colonels Daniel Bek Pirumyan, Hovsepian, Karakeshisyan, Samartyan, and others were in Alexandropol. Even at the time of the Turkish attack, there was a 7,000-strong military unit in the city. Well, in the end, did our troops put up any resistance in Alexandropol or not?
Mar
Hovaki Melikan writes that nevertheless, our army, once brought into order, began to fight. The people of Alexandropol formed a volunteer regiment and took up positions on the hill of the city cemetery. The military staff and the officials left the city. Colonel Osik Bek Pirumyan was appointed as the commandant of the city. The Turks entered the city several times, but after suffering heavy casualties, they were driven back. During the fighting in the city, 2 Russian regiments fought alongside Armenian volunteers, one consisting of officers only and the other of soldiers. According to the sources, the 1st regiment fought heroically. According to Hovaki Melikan, while the 1st regiment fought bravely, the 2nd raised the white flag in front of its fortification and declared that it had no intention of fighting the Turks. Consequently, they were disarmed by order of the commander. The battle intensified. The Georgievsky regiment of Russian officers and the Armenian 4th regiment stood out for their heroism. Around 1 p.m., the fortress commander Yakovsky returned from the Turkish command and conveyed to the commander Nazarbekyan new Turkish demands, which proposed: provide the Turks with all the trains in order to transport troops to Persia, surrender the city and withdraw the army from there to Jajur, leaving only the militia and a cavalry battalion, which together with the Turkish cavalry would serve as a gendarmerie in the city. General Nazarbekyan accepted the proposed terms and sent his agreement to the Turkish commander through one of his soldiers. After delivering the agreement to the commander, the soldier was killed on his way back, and his body was brought to the city by car. Analyzing the secret of Turkey's victories, the periodical Kafkaskoye Slova wrote: if we take a careful look, it becomes evident that all of Turkey's successes, from Trabzon to Alexandropol, are less about the successful execution of military operations, in the true sense of the word, and more the result of diplomatic intrigues and violations of international law norms. According to eyewitnesses, at the beginning of the attack, the fortress garrison resisted, and in the first hour alone, 180 Turks were killed, while the Armenian side suffered 9 casualties. The enemy was forced to stop the attack and send a delegation, declaring that they had no intention of taking the city of Alexandropol or waging war against the military and the people. There is no need to fight in vain. According to the decision of the Batumi Constellation deputies, the railways have already been handed over to us, through which we will transport our troops to Julfa and remain at the station, without entering the city and causing harm to the military and the population. This place is called Batvoblur. From here, on the morning of May 15, 1918, the Armenian army officer Hakop Der Hakopov witnessed the first moments of the Turkish invasion of the city. After which, in the area called Gazachi Post, he organized resistance against the Turks with the small Armenian forces. In his memoir, The Nightmare of Alexandropol, he wrote, "Panic spread throughout the Arpachay Valley. People were rushing towards the town, pushing their livestock in front of them. Moans and cries could be heard from all directions." The screams were mostly from women and children. The former had lost their children, the latter their mothers. Most of them had been killed, wounded, and left to the mercy of fate without any help. Der Hakopov's feat is one of the rare episodes of resistance against the Turks. A small number of patriotic soldiers fought the Turks to the last breath. These centers of resistance were more of an exception rather than the rule. These battles revealed how disintegrated and demoralized the Armenian army was. This is how Der Hakopov describes the prevailing mood and moral psychological state among the Armenian soldiers. "Upon reaching my regiment, I faced its pitiful remains. Only 45 men remained at the regiment, while at the beginning of the battle, I saw only 20. The rest had fled away after the first shots. Things were not going well in the neighboring regiments either. There were those who complained about the lack of bullets, and when we pointed out the place where we were plenty, they either refused to go or, seizing the opportunity, vanished. From the initial 200 soldiers participating in the Battle of Gazachi Post, by the end it was hard to count even 70. Indeed, there were many wounded and killed, but deserters made up the majority. The resistance of the fortress garrison lasted for about 3 hours. In the end, the Armenian troops left Alexandropol with the majority of the city's population. Those who remained sent a delegation to the Turks at the suggestion of the fortress commandant Yankovsky and under the leadership of Mkrdich Ghazaryan. After receiving guarantees of the inviolability of their lives, property, and honor, the cultural capital of our country was surrendered to the enemy. Almost all the villages of the Alexandropol province were turned into slaughterhouses, where the most capable members of the population were mercilessly slaughtered and mutilated. However, what happened in the village of Zitankov is completely unprecedented and unique in its monstrosity. On May 25th, in those historic days of the Battle of Sardarapat, the Turkish military command came up with the diabolical plan to annihilate and destroy the Armenian population in the rear, targeting primarily the youth and male population for 2 reasons. First, out of fear that the Armenians might attack them from the back, and second, to take revenge on the peaceful population for their own defeats and failures. And they began gathering men in the border villages of the Echmiadzin province, from Zitankov to the Sardarapat front, according to the lists carefully prepared beforehand. They gathered them and took to Zitankov in groups under the strict supervision of the guards and locked them up in barns and large buildings. Only then the unfortunate people realized the monstrous plot that had been hatched against them, but all too late. Although there was no way to escape, a small group of men tried to flee through the mountains, but all were killed in the mountains and valleys. When the Turkish army entered the village and committed its usual atrocities, the young women and girls, finding no other way to preserve their honor, threw themselves into the lake, defending their dignity in the depths of the water. After that, the army went from door to door, taking the men, including their lists, to the designated place. The horrible atrocity began to unfold as evening approached. The Turks continued hurling bombs from their windows with devilish glee. destroying the countless lives with each blast. In the end, to hide the traces of their brutal atrocities, they set fire to the barns and burned the roofs, leaving more than 3,000 corpses underneath. Although the Turks had promised inviolability of life, property, and honor, on the 5th day after taking the city and the province, the Ottoman army drove the 3,600 youth of the province into the city, beating them mercilessly. They led the youth to Sarıkamış and Erzurum. When asked about the young men, İzzet Bek said that they were sent to Erzurum as a guarantee for the security of the captured province, and after staying there safely for 20 to 25 days, they would be sent back. But the bitter reality was that they were severely punished with the whip, forced into hard labor, and died from hunger and deprivation. 4 months later, only a quarter of the tormented youths returned and shared details of the torture endured by those who had died. The condition of the villagers was terrible. The army soldiers and the police looted them, snatching the plunder from each other's hands. From the north, the nomadic Tarakyama tribes of Akbaba, and from the south, the Tartars invaded the Armenian villages every night, plundering and taking away cattle, horses, and household goods. The Turks of Akbaba, dressed in military uniforms, robbed left and right and raped the helpless women of the village. This information, collected in the city administration, formed volumes. This is how the writer and publicist Atrpet described the attitude of the Turks towards the Armenians in 1918. The Ottoman officers had no remorse for torturing and killing the Armenian element. They had been brought up and instilled with the belief that the Armenians deserved such annihilation. When, after the victory of the Allies in the certain district, a Georgian officer told the Ottoman officers that Talyat and Enver were bloodthirsty beasts, murderers, and criminals, a very polite Ottoman officer replied that Talyat and Enver had never committed any crime. This was bound to happen because the Armenians not only deserved these massacres, but they had to be completely wiped out. This place is called Jartizor. Shortly after the occupation of Kars and Alexandropol in 1918, the Turks unleashed a new war against Armenia in the fall of 1920. And once again, Kars and Alexandropol were surrendered under almost the same scenario. The 6-month Turkish military occupation of the Alexandropol province in 1920 had a significantly harsher impact on the Armenian people than that of 1918. This place, called Jartizor, stands as a silent witness to the consequences of Turkish false pacifism. Between 1918 and 1921, the Turks massacred over 12,000 Armenians here, from Alexandropol and the villages of Lor. Even today, if one digs deeper right here, they can find the bones of those Armenians who fell victim to the Turkish yataghan because of our short-sightedness, gullibility, and, if you will, naivety. Is Armenian-Turkish reconciliation possible? Not today. And anyone who claims otherwise does not truly understand either the Turk or themselves. More precisely, they know neither the Turk nor themselves. In our opinion, those who harbor hope for Turkish-Armenian reconciliation, whether consciously or unconsciously, are enemies of the Armenian people. And the responsibility for any new bloodshed that may result tomorrow from such a step, regardless of external intrigues, will fall first and foremost on the Armenians themselves. Shahan Natali, The Turks and Us, 1928.